Hello everyone, welcome to JS Cakes and my name is Deepak. Here in this tutorial we're going to talk about Angular, mocking and services and reactive programming and signals eventually. So in order to render the content on your web page, we need that data in concurrent SOA architecture. We receive the data usually over the HTTP. There are a few methods available on the HTTP verb which are like put, post, get. Usually people get and receive data from the server. So this data is usually stored in the database, and that's something which we are not going to be talking in detail today. But then we'll just try to focus on the UI part of things. So this data we receive from the HTTP or HTTP request, and then we render the similar data on the web page using any of the framework. In our case, we have been using Angular 17, right? So we render a lot of this data. All that while, what we were doing essentially, we're just copying the data and keeping that locally stored in another variable and rendering it on the template. However, this is not something that we usually do in the production grade application. In production grade application, we usually used to have a mocking mechanism available. Using that, we usually render the data on the page during the development time. And sometimes if the APIs are available, we don't really need to use the mocking. But then mocking is not just used while development, it also used in unit testing. Unit testing is again a very essential part. Usually we try to cover all the 100% lines written in your Angular code, TS and HTML to be covered by unit tests. We cannot really frequently change the server data. It requires a lot of time and effort. However, what we do end up doing is essentially having a mocking tool, and that mocking tool runs on the client system, meaning your own system, Mac or Windows or Linux for that matter. And then here we try to mimic all these scenarios. We try to put different conditions on the JSON, and then we render them, and we call them just like we call the regular APIs. We call these mocked responses on our web page and render the different data and different and try to validate different conditions. But again, in the scope of this tutorial, I'm not going to be talking much about unit testing or server side programming or anything of that sort. We're going to be focusing on the UI side of things only, and especially in Angular, right? Let me just quickly scan and tell you what are the available method in which you can create a mocking. So let me go to the VS Code and show you some, right? So here on the VS Code, you can see that this is our project, right? And then here, if you notice here, in case of auth, we had not service. The auth service, we usually return just the regular data. So here we are not really attaching it with any of server API. We have just created a local one, and then it waits for about a second and then returns the data. And that's why if you are following along, you may have noticed that once you click on login, it takes about a moment to go to the landing page, and it's because that we have delayed it for about a second, right? So not needed it just to mimic how a real response would work, and that's why I'd mimic this, right? So we're going to be talking about pipe of all these operators and all these observables in from the RxJS a little while, but let me just focus on the mocking part of things, right? So now if you go to the dashboard module, here on the dashboard module, if you open the landing component, so in landing component, what we had done essentially is just taken the dump of the data. We had created a few rows, sample ones, and just pasted them over here, right? So this is by this, I can at least spin up my HTML, and then it renders the way you may have seen it. We had also seen how the for loop works here in Angular 17. You may have noticed all of this. So that's how we used to render, right? So this is one way of doing a mocking in which we just copy the data and put it in some of the files, and we can also basically create sample files to create these data, right? But this is a very crude way of storing a data, right? It is not really recommended. Normally, the data layer must be different from your regular application. The data layer, the work of data layer should be to control the data, not really in the component, but in a separate service, in the injectable service or separate singleton service to render the data alone, right? But all you can do is like here, as we have copied it here, you can also keep it in the assets folder. Maybe you can create a folder, let's say sample data, and inside the sample data I'll say lending component. So the data required for lending components, I'll name it as JSON, right? So now here in this component I can simply copy this as is, right, and put it like this, save it. Now I can simply import this here, So as you can see on the error console, it says that you need to basically resolve JSON module to import the JSON. So this usually so all you need to do is put this flag here in the tsconfig.json, wait for it to compile, or just restart this application. Since you have made the JSON file change, it may not be really available for it to watch. So clear the console, and run start. In a moment it will start and will let you really import this. Now you can see that the error for this has gone. So this data will then be available. You can just simply replace it here and put it like this, remove this, and done. Right, so let it just build for a moment and we'll quickly check our application file and see if things have worked or not. Now we can see the application has compiled successfully. So let's just quickly go to the Chrome browser and see if our application is able to render the data or not. So click on the login button, wait for a second, and it lands here. So now we can see even the data is being loaded. So first strategy, meaning is to just importing the direct JSON files, work here in our app. Second strategy about it, right? So if we quickly go to the VS Code, okay. So there is a very popular tool available for UI developers to work on and spin up various different mocking strategy, and it is predominantly used in the application in production grade application. So that's called json-server. Now let us just quickly go to the browser and see what it is all about. So here's the json-server. As it says that get the full fake REST API with zero coding in less than 30 seconds. It's actually true, right? So if you can notice that the weekly download for this particular library is 300,000. It's more than 300,000 essentially, and it comes with the MIT license. It's free. You can actually quickly just download it and start using it. So we're not going to be getting into details of how it works. We'll try to create a few mocking APIs using JSON server, and we'll just move to the tool of our choice, which is Mockoon for our case. And it is, I'll tell you when I explain Mockoon, I'll tell you its advantages, particularly in the modern day world web applications, like why it is important to have a tool like that. But let's just focus on JSON server for now. So as it says that first of all we need to have the JSON server installed, right? So let's just go to the VS Code and try to install this. So here is a VS Code. Let me split the terminal into two and come here. So let me clear this. Now let's install. It takes a while to install. Let me meanwhile revert this change because I don't need that. And I think I can remove this. Now you understand the point, essentially what I was trying to make while doing the mocking is that you can import it using the plain JSON file and you can keep it in assets and start using them anywhere, right? So now we can see package is added and successfully. So let me exit from here. And now in order for this to work, right, it is fairly simple. So what we need to do is we need to create a file called db.json, as it is also mentioned in their documentation, right? So let's just create db.json first. So the file name is db.json. So by the name of it, as you can guess, that it's a JSON file essentially. So what it does is that it essentially renders your API response on 3000 port. So this is how a typical JSON file in db.json file looks in case of mocking, right? So and then it's fairly simple, right? So now what we can do is like we need to run this, right? So in order to run this, it's very, very simple. The command is json. Let me clear this first. JSON server. And then all you need to do is watch command, so that if you make any changes in the db.json, it must be taken care, right? So now you can see that we have 3 sample APIs available in the JSON server, right? So you can see that on 3000 post, comment, and profile. So let's just go back to Chrome and see if that works. So the first one was localhost 3000. It must give me a list of APIs available under this port. It's a landing page of, it says post, comment, and profile. It's pretty much like Swagger documentation. It's not exactly that, but then it's very much similar to that, right? You can get all the APIs that are available in it. Let's just click on post. Here it is. You can see that the JSON data, it returns an array like this. Let's go back and let's click on comment. You can see that comment is available here. Third one is profile, right? So as you've seen that it returns all the three, let us just use that in our purpose. Like in our case, we can actually modify any of this and can make use in our application. So let's go back to VS Code. And here on the VS Code, the data that we have been using so far for rendering the landing page, let's just copy this data as is and go to the db.json again. Here on the, we were returning like this. So let's say this is landing page and put it like this. Go up, cover this with quotes as should be considered as a string. Yep. So now let's just see, we can now see that the landing page has come here. So let us go back to the Chrome and now refresh this page. Now you can see the landing page has come here and click on it, and now you can see the data is available here, right? It is this simple, right? You can actually write sophisticated logic in this as well. However, like let's say if you wish to have some fake response being returned, there is a faker.js library available that we are going to be also making use while creating a Mockoon mocks. And this is pretty much it. Like this is what you can do. You can do hundreds of other things, and all these things are available here in the documentation. You can make use of it and create things of your choice. You can actually create a parameter, put, post, get, all the seven other verbs of HTTP are available, and you can make use of it to render data and can actually create a sophisticated logic. This is a great tool, right? I've been using personally my own the JSON server all my career, right? So, but now recently I moved to the new offering from the community, which is Mockoon, and that's what we are going to be focusing on right now. So I think you understand what JSON server is all about and how to make other API pages render and how to make APIs available overall. So now let me just go back to VS Code and let me just open the Mockoon documentation now, and let's create mock API and wait hundreds of other things, right? So here is a documentation for Mockoon. Okay. Mockoon is basically a tool that a GUI tool that you can deal with, and I'm going to be showing you that in a bit, but let me just give you a brief of it. Here you can actually create a lot of complex use cases. Let's say if you want to have an authentication done, let's say if you want to also have an authentication and the other APIs to be dependent upon after the authentication, all that can be done basically using Mockoon. Right, so Mockoon is a very sophisticated tool, and the other good part about it is that it provides you a GUI to fiddle with. You can actually go there and see your response, modify it anytime. Starting and stopping is a very quick and a breezy affair. It should not really be cumbersome. It's very easy to use, and that's why I particularly prefer using Mockoon ever since I've come across this tool, which is just recently, right? So now in my current application, the application that I'm building for my company and for my customers, I am personally using this tool, and I'm very happy to use this tool, honestly. So on another disclaimer, I will say that Mockoon hasn't really paid me anything to say all of this. It's just my personal opinion about this particular tool, and that's what I've said, right? So here is the documentation of it. Let's just try to install it as they say. So in order to install that in different, like I personally use a Mac. So all you can do is like just copy this command, right? The homebrew command and brew install Mockoon, and just you copied it. And I can actually go back to my VS Code terminal and try to run this. But before I run this, let me stop the JSON server. I don't think so I need it here. Let me clear this, put this here. I already have a Mockoon installed, so I'm not really sure if it would get installed and will throw an error. But then the idea is pretty simple. So here, in case of Mac, you can just simply run this command. In case if you're using Windows or if you're using Windows or Linux, there are other ways available. So here for the Windows and here in case of Windows, you can use this, or in case of you can also install the installer, right? And all of this can be done. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm going to be following the tool for Macintosh, personally the system that I'm using, and then I'll show you how it works, right? So let me quickly go back to VS Code and see where it has reached. It says it is downloading, although I already had Mockoon, but okay, let it download. Who cares? Okay, so now it is upgrading. So you may receive a different sort of a message because since I already had Mockoon available in my system, and that's why it's saying all of this. But then if you do not have Mockoon, then you may find it a different message appearing here on the console. Just wait for a while until this gets installed, and then we'll resume. Yeah. So now you can see inside the Mockoon documentation, there is a special section available for Faker. In our case, we have been using this pretty extensively, right? So let's say we wanted to return some of the logic, and then we also wanted it to return some of the data. So here at the Mockoon documentation, you can come down to the Faker JS helpers, and these helpers are available, right? So this comes under templating. So what we are essentially returning from the Faker response is a template, right? So this template has its own coding style, and this coding style, as we had seen, that the hash repeat 5 basically does is that it repeats those for the five times, right? Like look at this particular template over here. So you have user ID, name, lang, so on and so forth, and then comes to friends. And here in the friends, now you can see that it is copying, it is basically running it for the 2 times. So unlike other other mocking library where you would have to basically key in the response yourself, here if you want to generate a random response, you can just make use of their template and write a very complex data without repeating too many times, right? So in this case, if I were to return this particular block of template from my Mockoon sample or mocked API, this would have returned one object in which friends would have appeared 2 times with the 2 distinct objects. Similarly, for the username, if URL param had an ID, it would have written it like this. So you can actually write these kind of logic pretty easily over here, right? So now that should make now sense that what it would look like. But in our case, we are also going to be generating the person name and then the last name and everything else as randomly. So we are not going to be providing it. We don't want it to be provided, and we are going to be generating it for 20, 15, 5 odd times. Let's just go back to Mockoon and see how we would do it. Right. So here in this case, you can notice that it's going to be repeating for the 10 times. And those 10 times, it's going to be having ID, street, city, zip, state, zip, country, latitude, longitude, phone, email, websites. All of these basically come from the Faker library, right? The Faker, it tells you what to return. So this Faker in the template, as we had seen, the Faker helper are available. So Faker, let's say address, street address. So it will return the address and the street address inside it. So address type and a city name, address type and a state bar. Similarly, it can tell you the phone and a number, an internet and an email, internet and a URL. So internet, phone, address, data type, all of it is available basically in their helpers. Let's just go back to the Chrome browser and quickly have a look at the other helpers available. So you can see the Faker helper library, please. So here you can see that it has location, person, number, internet, email, all of these available. So Mockoon also makes use of Faker 8.1 version. So you can open it over here. And here you can basically look at their documentation to get a good fair bit of understanding as to how to generate the sample responses, but then that's really not needed at this point. I'm just going to be explaining it good enough so that you can just start it right then. Right. So here is here's the helper, and inside it, what exactly you need. Right. So under location, a zip code. Location. So since zip code is a part of location data type, so you can drive it like this. So all of it like is available here, and there are many more logic that you can write. But then this is a base of it. Right. So you can go to these uh, places here, and if you want to create your own custom body, message, custom helper, you can all write it over here. So array, repeat, right, the first name, zip code, all of it, aliases are available here. Like you can use postcode, lorem, int, float, street, city, whatnot, right? So repeat, again, we have used a repeat already. In our case, we're going to be doing it for 10 times for the addresses part. And yeah, this is pretty much it. So if you want to deep dive into it, just come over here on the Mockoon documentation and give it a go. But then that's pretty, that's, but what I'm explaining is going to be good enough for you to start creating the mocks using Faker, right? So let's just go back to the Mockoon GUI and see how it works in our case, right? So now we can see we have copied the address. So in this template, I'm going to be having ID street, all of this object 10 times, right? So this is how you write it. Now let me just copy the other one, which is students. In case of students, I'm going to be creating this. And then the student is also a get type. So let me put it here. Students, let me change it. Students over here. So all of these are going to be used. So right now we are just creating it. And we're going to be making use it in our application. So students is basically again another get API response. In this KPI, that this is how these are the three sections important. This section over here is important. Now you can see that I've used a faker, and in that case, I'm going to be using a number data type and min and max. So which means that it is going to be returning a number which could be anything between 0 and 25. So this logic is already taken care by the faker in Mockoon. You just have to write it down over here like this. Similarly for chemistry, maths, and computer. So these are the four subjects that we have covered in the application that we have built, and this is how it is done, right? So min max. So that's why when we render this API, you would notice that the numbers given to it would be between 0 to 25, right? So now let's just copy the other one. Addresses we have copied, students, and let's just copy the students marks. HTTP root, it's a get, and then let's just put this here and marks. Similar one would be given here, and yep. And also, yeah, there is one thing that we have forgotten to do is that all of these should be basically appended by the API, and I'll tell you the reason of it in a moment. Okay, so the reason to start all these paths using API is fairly simple. It's that we're also going to be basically creating a proxy settings in the Angular application, and in order to read that particular API from the proxy, since this API rendering engine or Mockoon is running on a different port, and in order to access it from the port where your application is rendered, you will either have to create all the APIs on the same port. If not, then we will have to basically create a proxy file. So let's just for now let's just follow along, and then I'll just change the path of it, and I'll explain the reasons a little while later when we go to the services thing. So API students, and then the address I would make it as API / addresses, and same goes with students mark. So I'm just going to be putting an API / over here as well. So let's just save all of this. So now we have created three APIs that we are going to be using, and there's another API we need, which is basically the student marks, the student details essentially, wherein we would see the personal details and things like that, right? So let's just copy this mock response the template which I've already created, and I'm just going to be using it as is way up. So let me write as HTTP route. In this case, I'm going to be putting it as API forward slash students details, and sim here as well, details, and in the body, let's just put this here. So what I'm essentially doing is that I'm creating 3 4 different blocks. Okay, and the reason for creating these blocks is that the course name, if you notice here, it is MSc, and the course name over here is BSc, right? And the course name over here is again BSc, but then the subjects are different. So there are some minor changes that I want it to have, and that's precisely is the reason I've created 4 or 5 different blocks so that I can so that I can get 4 or 5 different sort of responses within the same array object. As you can see that I've encapsulated that in an array like this. So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, and this is 5. 5 different type. The first type will have 4 occurrences, the next will 5, 8, 5, and 5 respectively. Right, so I think we have created all the APIs now, and as you can see over here that it shows a green button, which means this is not currently running right now, and to run it we just have to click it over here, and now the Mockoon server is running. So now let's just quickly go back to Chrome browser and try to render that application. So here's a Chrome browser. Let me just see if I can read those. So it's running on local host 3002, right? So 3002. And I'm going to be putting, first of all, is API forward slash students, right? So let's just put this here. There it is. So our template is working, right? So now let's just put the other one, which is API forward slash addresses. Enter. Here you go. The addresses are available here as well. The next one is a student's mark and student details. So let's just see if those two also work. Yeah. And then the last one is students details. Yeah. But then I think we need to correct the naming convention. One has a hyphen and the one is a camel case. So let me go back to Mockoon and fix this up. So consistency in any application is absolutely important, right? So the reason behind being consistent in an application is that if a new developer comes in, or if you are stuck on an application is super large, so in that case, it is absolutely important for you to have a consistency, so that in case if you're looking for a particular answer or a particular problem in your code base, you would have a better hunch of where to look at, right? So if your application is not consistent in terms of the way in which you write it, or in the way in which you um, define things, then it will be very difficult for you to search when there is a bug, right? So that's why in my personal application scope, I always try to be super consistent. Like I in the production grade application that I build, consistency is one of the things that I absolutely look at while I'm reviewing the code, right? So I think we have pretty much covered the mocking part now. Now the next tutorial we are going to be talking about the reactive programming, right, which is very, very important. And yep, let's see you in the next section. Thank you.